A few months ago, I went on a car trip across the width of Australia via the Great Ocean Road, from Adelaide to Newcastle, stopping alongside Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra. However, in this video, I aim to put what I've learned during my time at the Canberra Museum, what I already knew, and what I've researched to create a small documentary about the history of Australia. Throughout the video, I will also share some pictures I took during my time at the museum. Before we start this documentary, let me first clarify what sections and/or events of Australian history we will be looking at in this documentary. We will take a look at the Mabo case, the Gold Rush, the 1965 Freedom Rides, which was inspired by America, the Stolen Generations, and the 1967 referendum. The first events that we are going to talk about is in regard to Eddie Mabo, who was an Indigenous Australian activist renowned for his crucial role in the fight for land rights in Australia. He is best known for his involvement in the landmark Mabo case, which challenged the legal doctrine of terra nullius, the principle that claimed the land was unoccupied or empty before European colonization. This doctrine effectively denied the existence of Indigenous land rights and justified the dispossession of Aboriginal peoples. Mabo and his fellow plaintiffs argued that the land was not uninhabited but had been occupied and cared for by Indigenous Australians for thousands of years. Their legal challenge, initiated in the 1980s, sought to overturn this doctrine and recognize the traditional rights of Indigenous people to their ancestral lands. In 1992, the High Court of Australia delivered a groundbreaking decision in favor of Mabo, recognizing the existence of native title rights for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This ruling fundamentally transformed Australian land law by acknowledging that Indigenous Australians had a historical connection to the land, thus granting them rights to their traditional territories. Mabo's activism and the case itself were instrumental in raising awareness about Indigenous land rights and the injustices faced by Aboriginal communities, leading to significant legal and social reforms in Australia. Eddie Mabo passed away shortly before the landmark decision was made, but his legacy continues to influence discussions around land rights, reconciliation, and social justice in Australia. Next up, we will go back in time a number of years to take a look at the Australian Gold Rush. The Australian Gold Rush, which began in the 1850s, marked a transformative period in the nation's history, shaping its social, economic, and cultural landscape. This phenomenon was triggered by the discovery of gold at Bathurst in 1851, quickly spreading to regions such as Victoria and New South Wales. The promise of wealth attracted a diverse influx of migrants, including people from Britain, Europe, North America, and China, contributing to a multicultural tapestry that is a hallmark of modern Australia. The gold rush had immediate economic impacts. It spurred rapid population growth and urbanization, leading to the establishment of booming towns and infrastructure development. Cities like Melbourne and Ballarat emerged as vibrant hubs of commerce and culture, fueled by the prosperity brought about by gold mining. The influx of wealth from gold also provided the government with the resources needed to invest in public services, education, and transportation, laying the foundation for Australia's economic development. The gold rush also significantly influenced immigration to Australia, reshaping its demographic landscape. The lure of fortune drew a diverse array of migrants from various parts of the world. While many came, the gold rush contributed to a rich narrative of adventure and opportunity that remains central to the Australian ethos. The stories of fortune seekers, their struggles, and their successes have become part of the national folklore, symbolizing resilience and the pursuit of a better life. This legacy is reflected in literature, art, and popular culture, celebrating the spirit of exploration that defined the era. In conclusion, the gold rush was a pivotal event in Australia's history, influencing its economic, social, and cultural development. Its legacy, particularly in terms of immigration and diversity, continues to shape contemporary Australia as the nation seeks to balance narratives of opportunity and progress with the realities of its past. Acknowledging and reconciling these histories will be essential in fostering a united and inclusive society. Next up, we are moving back to the 19th century to discuss the famous. The 1965 Freedom Rides in Australia marked a pivotal moment in the fight for Aboriginal rights and social justice. Inspired by the civil rights movements in the United States, a group of university students from the University of Sydney, led by activist Charles Perkins, organized a bus tour through rural New South Wales. This campaign aimed to draw attention to the systemic discrimination faced by Aboriginal Australians and to advocate for their rights. From February 12 to 27, 1965, the activists traveled to towns like Walgett, Moree, and Kempsey, where they confronted racial segregation and inequality. Their primary goal was to highlight the poor living conditions and injustices experienced by Indigenous people. The Freedom Riders staged sit-ins at segregated public facilities, such as swimming pools and cafes, challenging the entrenched racial discrimination that permeated everyday life. The rides encountered significant resistance and hostility from some local communities. Yet the activists remained resolute in their mission. Their courageous actions garnered substantial media attention, which played a crucial role in bringing the issue of Aboriginal rights to the forefront of national consciousness. Through their efforts, the Freedom Rides sparked public debate and laid the groundwork for future Indigenous rights movements. One of the most significant outcomes of the Freedom Rides was the heightened awareness of the injustices faced by Aboriginal Australians. This growing consciousness contributed to landmark changes in Australian policy, including the 1967 referendum. This pivotal referendum allowed Aboriginal Australians to be counted in the national census and empowered the federal government to make laws for their benefit, marking a significant step towards equality. The legacy of the 1965 Freedom Rides continues to resonate in contemporary Australia. They serve as a powerful symbol of the ongoing struggle for equality and justice, reminding us of the importance of reconciliation and recognition of Aboriginal rights. The Freedom Rides not only transformed the landscape of activism in Australia, but also inspired future generations to advocate for social justice and Indigenous rights. The 1967 referendum in Australia was a landmark event that represented a significant turning point in the recognition of Aboriginal rights and the movement towards reconciliation. Held on May 27, 1967, the referendum sought to amend the Australian Constitution to allow for the inclusion of Aboriginal Australians in the national census and to grant the federal government the authority to make laws for their benefit. Prior to the referendum, Aboriginal Australians were largely excluded from the census, which meant they were not recognized as citizens in the same way as other Australians. The Constitution originally contained provisions that allowed the states to make laws regarding Aboriginal people, while the federal government had no power to legislate on their behalf. This legal framework perpetuated discrimination and social inequality. The 1967 referendum was a transformative event that reshaped the landscape of Aboriginal rights in Australia. It represented a crucial step towards recognition and inclusion, reflecting a broader societal shift towards acknowledging the historical injustices faced by Indigenous communities. The legacy of the referendum continues to inspire ongoing efforts toward reconciliation and social justice in contemporary Australia. And finally, we take a brief look at perhaps the most famous and talked about event in Stolen Generation. The Stolen Generations refer to a tragic chapter in Australian history, characterized by the forced removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families by government policies. This practice, which spanned from approximately 1905 to 1969, aimed to assimilate Indigenous children into white Australian society, under the misguided belief that it would improve their welfare and cultural integration. The ramifications of these policies were profound, resulting in lasting trauma for individuals, families, and communities. The origins of the Stolen Generations can be traced back to various state and territory laws that permitted the removal of Aboriginal children based on their perceived best interests. The policies were often justified by the notion that Indigenous parents were incapable of raising their children, leading to the systematic separation of children from their families. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of children were affected, with many placed in institutions or foster homes, where they were frequently forbidden from speaking their languages or practicing their cultures. Policies led to intergenerational trauma, loss of cultural identity, and social dislocation. Families were torn apart, and many children grew up without knowledge of their heritage, language, or family ties. The psychological impact of these experiences has been profound, contributing to ongoing challenges related to mental health, education, and community cohesion among Indigenous Australians. In response to the injustices of the Stolen Generations, there has been a growing recognition of the need for reconciliation. The 1997 Bringing Them Home report, commissioned by the Australian government, brought national attention to the plight of the stolen generations and recommended reparations, public apologies, and policies aimed at healing and restoration. In 2008, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd delivered a formal apology to the stolen generations, acknowledging the pain and suffering caused by these policies. While this apology represented a significant step forward, the journey toward healing and reconciliation is ongoing. Many Indigenous Australians continue to advocate for recognition, justice, and reparations for the injustices of the past. The legacy of the stolen generations serves as a reminder of the importance of acknowledging historical wrongs and working toward a future that respects and honors the rights and cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. In conclusion, the events surrounding the stolen generations reflect a dark period in Australian history marked by systemic racism and cultural assimilation. The impact of these policies continues to be felt today, highlighting the need for ongoing dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation. The story of the stolen generations, exemplified by narratives like Rabbit-Proof Fence, underscores the resilience of Indigenous communities and the importance of preserving their history and culture for future generations.